Good morning. Welcome to virtual Bible class. We're still in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 10. And we got to verse 23 last time. Looked at the first half of verse 23, so we're going to start with the second half of verse 23. And go through the first half of verse 34 in this section and take a look at that, and then we'll talk about it. And on the morrow he rose and went forth with them, and certain of the brethren from Joppa accompanied him. And on the morrow they entered into Caesarea, and Cornelius was waiting for them, having called together his kinsmen and his near friends. And when it came to pass that Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter raised him up, saying, "Stand up, I myself also am a man." And as he talked with him, he went in and findeth many come together. And he said unto them, "Ye yourselves know how it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to join himself or come unto one of another nation, and yet unto me hath God showed that I should not call any man common or unclean. Wherefore also I came without gainsaying when I was sent for. I ask therefore, with what intent ye sent for me?" And Cornelius said, 4 days ago, until this hour, I was keeping the 9th hour of prayer in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright apparel, and saith, "Cornelius, thy prayer is heard, and thine alms are had in remembrance in the sight of God. Send therefore to Joppa, and call unto thee Simon, who is surnamed Peter. He lodgeth in the house of Simon, a tanner, by the seaside. Forthwith, therefore, I sent to thee, and thou hast well done that thou art come. Now therefore we are all here present in the sight of God, to hear all things that have been commanded thee of the Lord." And Peter opened his mouth and said. The following day, this was at Caesarea now with Peter, and the following day, Peter, the 3 Gentile messengers, and 6 Jewish brethren from Joppa, as we will find out later in chapter 11 and verse 12, departed for Caesarea. And apparently the 39-mile, or about 30 mile trip was broken into 2 segments because they arrived, it says, on the morrow. And the time since the initial vision to Cornelius consumed portions of 4 days, as Cornelius mentions in verse 30. The Roman centurion was anxiously awaiting the company. Having anticipated their arrival, he had assembled a group of relatives and close friends who obviously had considerable respect for this officer. It reminds me of being in the Ukraine. If you've been in some other country before to teach a class, to preach, or whatever it may have been, yeah, you have probably seen this as well. But we went over to Ukraine and was able to go into the schools and teach in classes. They considered it teaching English, but we taught English by teaching the Bible. And we could go into the classes with the students, and sometimes we would sit in a meeting with the teachers and even the principal of the school. But they were all excited about listening. And that just amazed me. how much they wanted to hear. And even coming in on Saturdays, Saturdays was a normal day for school for some of the students there. Not all of them had to come in, but some of them did come in even on a Saturday. And I remember some came in on a Saturday to listen, even though it wasn't their turn to be there on that particular Saturday. And two little girls in particular, and the other day, with being kind of house confined, as most of us are, at least somewhat anyway, we were going through picture albums, and my two youngest children was able to see some of those pictures from the Ukraine, and there was a picture of me with those two girls who had come in on Saturday, even though it wasn't their day. And one of them gave me her little Russian English translation book because the day before, or that day I suppose it was, that day, I had given her a necklace. I had many things, most of them I had numerous amounts of various items that I would hand out to the people, the students in these classes. But someone had given me a necklace, and it was just one of them, and I was thinking the whole way over there, I wonder how I'm going to do this. One necklace, who am I going to give that to? Well, it was the girl who came in on Saturday when she didn't have to. I thought, who else to give it to but her? So I did, and then when I did that, she gave me her phrase book, Russian English book. I'm sure that was very costly to her, way more costly than that necklace was that I gave to her. But they wanted to hear. That excites you as well as the teacher when you have students that are like that. And here's Cornelius, he's ready to go. He's been waiting for parts of 4 days now. And he gathers family in, and he gathers friends in, and even the servants in his house are there. He wants to hear. So when Peter encountered Cornelius, Cornelius was overcome with emotion, and he fell at the apostles' feet in a worshipful prostrating himself, and some doubt that the Gentile captain really expressed worship to Peter. If he did not, then why did the apostle react the way he did? Larkin points out that all other uses of the term suggest either true or false worship. It says worship. Why consider it to be anything else? He didn't understand. And in the emotion that he felt and this anticipation, he did that, but Peter informs him that that's not the thing to do. And so Peter, raising him up, said, "Stand up. I myself also am a man." Now, by the way, if Peter was the original pontiff or the pope, would he not have accepted that adoration? Because the popes today certainly do and have for some time. And for centuries, they have accepted that kind of honor, the kissing of the ring and other things, and bowing. But Peter tells him to stand up, that he is also just a man. Now, Peter and Cornelius conversed for a while, and then entered the house where a large crowd had gathered together. And Peter addressed the assembly. The apostle appeared to what apparently was common knowledge, namely that Jews, or appealed to what was apparently common knowledge, that Jews normally did not socialize with Gentiles. That usually did not happen. The term unlawful has to do with custom rather than a specific prohibition in the Mosaic Code. But a man by the name of Edersheim has a detailed discussion of the separatist practices of the Jews relative to the Gentiles in his book on pages 26 through 28 of a book that he wrote about that. But in this connection, he makes this note. He says, the most unexpected and unprepared for revelation from the Jewish point of view was that of the breaking down of the middle wall of partition between Jew and Gentile. And specifically, that part of what he said is on page 29 of his book. But Peter informs these folks that God had showed, that he had explained, that he had proven to him that he should not think of any man, that is, any person, as common or unclean. And the significance of the vision apparently had worked. It had penetrated into his thoughts. Here in the creatures within this great sheet were really representing people, so that Peter could learn a lesson about people. And Peter says, therefore, that he came to Caesarea without gainsaying. That is, without objection, without any objection. There is no conflict between this statement and the record of the mini debate, if you want to call it that, the mini debate that Peter earlier had with the Lord in verse 14. When the Spirit finally instructed the apostle to get thee down and go with them, nothing doubting, for I have sent them, then Peter, in verse 20, did precisely that. He did just exactly what the Holy Spirit told him to do, to go down without doubting. And he did. And he says that again here. So here he is in this Gentile home. He then asks, what's the purpose for which you sent for me? Why did you send for me? Why have I been brought here? And it seems that up to this point, the apostle knew that the Lord wanted him to view Gentiles in a different light, but he had not quite grasped yet the fact that his mission was to introduce to them the gospel of Christ, even though he had been informed that they wanted to hear words from him. And so while we said some of the things penetrated, it seems that truth sometimes penetrates slowly. Sometimes truth penetrates in stages. So yes, he came down without any objection. He understood what God meant, that God is no respecter of persons. But he still didn't quite know that he was there to preach the gospel to them. And happily, Cornelius is going to explain that to him. He relates that 4 days earlier, at about this same time, the 9th hour, a man, and is an angel, verse 3, clothed in bright apparel, which is a detail that we're not given in chapter 1, and are in the earlier parts of the chapter. But this angel in bright apparel informed him that his prayer had been heard. His prayer had been heard. And this was not an evidence that the centurion was saved already. And we're told that later in chapter 11 and verse 14, that he is not saved at that point. It was simply an affirmation that God was aware of his sincere heart, and he was responding to his need of hearing the gospel. God can be moved by honest, seeking souls. in chapter 16, verse 9, we'll see similar things. But there is no evidence, however, that the Lord will go around his own plan and save the lost apart from obedience. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 9. Obedience is something that we have to learn. And one must necessarily infer, therefore, that the officer had felt a void in his life that not even his association with Judaism could satisfy, and he had prayed to God for assistance in this matter, and it's not unlikely that he had heard of Jesus Christ and wanted to know more about this Savior. And so Cornelius rehearses the details about sending to Joppa for Peter and thanks the apostle for responding. Thank you for coming. And you have been kind enough to come, the New American Standard Bible puts it. And he then anxiously makes a conclusion to all of this and why he had sent for him. And he says, we are all here in God's sight to hear what the Lord has commanded you to tell us. There are words that any preacher or teacher would love to hear. We're here to hear what God has said, all of it. We want to know all of it, not some of it, not part of it, not just the parts that sound good to us. We're here to listen to all of what God has to say. We want to hear it all. Now you consider the depth of this Gentile's understanding here at this point. He knows that God is watching this event. He acknowledges the Lord's authority over men, and he is aware that Peter has been charged with a divine responsibility. You have a divine responsibility to teach, and we want to hear it. We want to hear what you have to say. And he knows that he and his friends and family, those who are associated with him here, also have an obligation. And that's something that many audiences fail to realize. It's not just the speaker who has obligations. The listeners have obligations also. Obligations to hear, obligations to search to see if those things are true, and then an obligation to believe those things, and an obligation to be obedient to those things. So the listener has an obligation to listen to the heavenly message. Isn't that amazing? That we all have a responsibility when it comes to the gospel and hearing the gospel. The speaker to present it, to teach only those things that the Word says to do, to teach only those things that we have a thus saith the Lord for. And then the listener also has a responsibility to listen carefully and to heed those things and to be obedient to those things. I think that things would go better and people could say more that, I got a lot out of that lesson if they take their responsibility to really listen. To really listen to what is being said. That would be the case. I'm going to, for today, stop at this particular point. I'm not going to try to get any further into the text for today. But next time we'll look at verses 34, the end of verse 34, through verse 43, and take a look at those passages and look at those, and we'll talk about what's going on there. And there are many good things that we will be able to learn from those. But until next time then, we're going to stop there and keep on